I don't think we have a cost of living crisis, actually. I think we have a low-income growth crisis. How do you fix that?
So in the review, we spend a lot of time worrying about how do you create the right circumstances for people to flourish in a way on their own.
Now, what's the answer to that question? Everything a decent society values, the vibrancy of its democracy, everyone having a fair shot at living a life they've reason to value, being able to trust those around you, is undermined by inequality. And wow, Britain is an unequal country, as damning statistics show. A man born in Blackpool, for instance, will enjoy life until only 51 before his health starts to disintegrate, while someone in Richmond, it's 69. The top 10% of households hold a staggering 57% of total wealth, while the bottom 50% of the population owns less than 5% of total wealth. Worse, as a 6-year review into British inequality led by Nobel Economic Prize winner Professor Angus Deaton reported, income and wealth inequality are not the only source of inequality. It's stacked inequality, layer by layer, by disadvantages of age, geography, education, gender, ethnicity, mental and physical health, so it becomes impossible to escape. Worse, we're living through a long-term, protracted stagflation risk, defined as a combination of high inflation, weak economic growth and rising unemployment, with its origins in the financial crisis, which has intensified since COVID. The lowest income households continue to bear a disproportionate burden. The Deaton Review from the IFS, funded by the Nuffield Foundation, unpacks which inequalities matter most, how are different kinds interrelated, what are the underlying forces that come together to create them, and how did we get here? Drawing on economics, sociology, public health, philosophy and policy studies, it represents one of the most exhaustive and ambitious studies ever mounted, and importantly sets out a framework for how policymakers should address their response. With me are two doyens of British social science. Helen Miller is director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, who anchored the project. She has almost 2 decades of experience analysing UK fiscal policy and providing trusted advice to policymakers and shaping political debate. And she's joined by one of the world's most cited economists, Sir Richard Blundell. He's a world-renowned expert in empirical microeconomics, labour supply and consumer behaviour, and has developed key tools for analysing tax reforms and household data. Research director of the IFS for 30 years, he was one of its lead editors. No one's better equipped to discuss the report and its findings are the pair of social scientists in front of me. Helen, start with you. Just in the introduction, I'm kind of stunned by the range of the Deaton Review. I mean, if you had an opening statement to really get our audience arrested, they've got to listen to the next 40 minutes, what would it be?
Oh, it's a tough one because it's so much work. But how about this? If you poll people and you ask them what's the form of inequality that you're most worried about, it's regional inequality. It's the fact that the UK has a big city in London, but regional cities that are a long way behind. And it's not just that they're a long way behind in income, they are behind in health, in education, in all sorts of other things. There are just lots and lots of inequalities. They come together and people really care about them. And here's a fun fact for you, however, the one that stuck with me. People in London aren't happier. We have this country that is geographically one of the most unequal in the developed world. People care about that inequality, but it's not just that people in London are happy and people everywhere else are unhappy. People in London aren't any happier either, partly because living here is expensive, there's high housing costs. So all of us care about all sorts of inequalities, including in the places we live.
Richard, over to you. The lead editor of this, you did a huge report on tax, Mealy's, now you do this. I mean, you are a veteran of this kind of work. I mean, if you had to put something on the table in this amazing array of information and data, what would it be?
I think first would be just the puzzle that when we started this, we thought, we've had quite a few years of what looks like fairly stable inequality. If you just look at things like the Gini for income inequality. The Gini just tells you how income is distributed across different ranks of the income distribution.
Right.
That's very high by comparisons across developed economies, but it's been quite stable. So the question was, why were people getting increasingly concerned about inequality? when we dug under this, we realised that, as Helen mentioned, it's not income inequality on its own that really matters. It's a number of things that come together, and they're super evident in the UK. There's the one that Helen mentioned as the priority that really came out, which is regional disparities. And that came out from the polling that we did as part of the review, but it comes out in a much deeper way. It's the way all the different kinds of inequalities that we found to be of concern come together to create a kind of disadvantage that's very hard to jump out of. And that produces this kind of conundrum in the UK where we have one great thriving area, London and the southeast, but even there this feels congested, not everybody's so happy. So there must be a better solution for addressing these concerns in the UK rather than just piling everything into London. And that's where, of course, the geographical inequalities and how best to solve them and what the challenges are really what came out of this review to me.
I mean, some of the numbers, the sheer horror of them is just, the one I read out in the introduction about healthy life expectancy. In some parts of the country, you start getting unwell when you're in your early 50s. In other parts, it's the late 60s, early 70s. And there's horror story after horror story. And apart from the shock of it, Helen, did you end up caring more about it, becoming more angry about it? Why should people listening to a podcast like this comparatively well off by definition, they've got the time and leisure time to do it. Why should they all care?
What stands out is that there are lots of reasons different people will care. So I think traditionally we think of inequality as an issue where some people will care and some people won't. And of course it's true that there are some forms of inequality that some people care about more, and people care differently depending on their political preferences. But I think what stands out is that there are so many inequalities. I think many of them lots of people would care about. So one, and there really are hundreds of examples of this, but one statistic that stands out in my mind is that something like a third of children aren't reaching a good level of development, a so-called good level, by the age of 5. And if you take children at 5 and you can predict with sort of horrifying accuracy how well they'll do at 16. So I don't think that's a left-right issue where if you're on the right, you will or won't care about that. That's an issue that these are our young people. Something's happening in their lives that's meaning that they're not having great outcomes. I think rather than thinking of inequality as something where the left care about it and the right don't care about it, I think there is lots of scope for people across the political spectrum to care about some of these things. A lot of these inequalities are arising in places where markets aren't working very well, which fundamentally means we're poorer as a country and things are more unequal. I take away from this there's a possibility for a broad range of people to get behind action on some of these areas.
Just to make that vivid by giving listeners an example of what you mean. What markets not working well that could work better, that's both creating inequality and making us, the generality of us, poorer?
Yeah. Well, perhaps I'll start with a small example and build it up. And I'll very much look to Richard because Richard spent his career studying some of these things. But if you take...
He's shaking his head or nodding.
Nodding. No. He's not sure what I'm going to say yet.
What are you going to set me up for?
Starting really in the here and now. People talk about having a cost of living crisis. I don't think we have a cost of living crisis, actually. I think we have a low income growth crisis. How do you fix that? You need people to be more productive so they can command higher wages. What's one of the ways that you can do that? It's that you can get people better training. Now, to a large degree, some of that training will happen because people want training and they're willing to go to a training provider and buy training. But we know that the market on its own won't provide enough training. So if you can fix that, if you can get people more training, then they'll be more productive, they'll get higher wages, we'll be happier. So that's one very specific example. But building from that, we also, and this is, I think, one of the things that the review really highlights, you can take an area that's currently deprived, take a northern city, for example, and you can give people more training, but that on its own may not be very effective. If you train workers up, actually, what a lot of them do is move to London. They do. They move to London, they get jobs here, and they get redistributed to the home counties. And that's great for them, but it hasn't helped that area. But the market on its own won't fix that because it's in no individual firm's incentive to move to a northern city and try to start a new big cluster. So again, the market isn't working out very well in a way that you're not getting firms and workers and finance and infrastructure all going into a place together. As a result, growth is lower, so we are poorer as a nation, And on top of that, you have all sorts of inequalities because people in those areas aren't doing as well. And the people who can move are from the better off families, the ones that stay are poorer, and so on and so on. So it's just one of those examples where I think there's something about the underlying market where you can kind of have, I think what Richard was calling earlier, before we were recording this, a double dividend. You can have things that are good for the country overall. You can lift all boats, and you can do some redistribution at the same time.
Richard.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, as I said before, despite these figures. And that's my sense of optimism, is that we have the potential for solving two big problems. They're big problems. We've had many years now of low growth. This, by the way, exacerbates the concerns of inequality. Low growth, even with the same levels of high inequality, just make them much more salient, much more evident, and we point that out. For example, over time, inheritances become much more valuable than income, and that's changing the nature of society. You can get rich quicker through inheritances now than you can through earning yourself up the wealth distribution. So those change, and the longer you get low growth, the more that gets embedded. And so that's a kind of key thing. So we need to kind of address the growth problem at the same time. But let me dig into that a little bit more. One key thing in the review, which surprised people to begin with, is that we spend a lot of time on productivity and firms and innovation around the UK. And why do we do that? Because there's a long tail of very low productivity firms in the UK, and they're geographically concentrated. So you can have whole areas which are effectively productivity deserts. And so you can imagine a young person growing up in those areas. There's really no incentive, if they don't think of leaving that area, to get trained or educated. So you can be in a very bad equilibrium, and without those trained workers, you won't solve the productivity problem. You won't attract firms in. So it's really this way of thinking of this as interrelated set of issues that, if we're lucky, we might be able to solve both these problems.
A lot of working class kids in these productivity deserts, their options are to get out coming south, to get out by joining the armed services, or just to kind of escape through drugs. And that's the reality of a lot of people's lives.
Yeah. Just to give an example of that, in a way, one of the great social mobilities is to move out of a poor area into a thriving area. And that is, of course, a great thing. But when you put that together and you realize there are now areas in the UK, not only do they have less people, less kids educated, but the ones that do get educated tend to leave that area. So you get areas where less than 20% are going on to degree level. Compare that to areas in London where there are more than 50%. And not only the 20% going on to a degree, many of those then leave the area because they can get the return to that degree, i.e. they can get a good job only by leaving. So we have this phenomenon of low initial education, then educational flight. That will never attract good productive firms, but it also changes the whole governance of the area. It's much a bigger social problem than just attracting productive firms.
Precisely. It deters teachers from teaching there because they can't have a social life. Doctors, the quality of people working in local government, all of it just goes downhill. It gets in a vicious circle. The Deaton Review does, in a sense, you are describing a stacked series of vicious circles.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of the review, highlighting that there are these things that are layering on top of each other. I think when looked at like that, it can feel completely overwhelming. They're also integrated. What do you do?
I am overwhelmed.
And we should come back at that.
We're going to come to solutions, though.
Exactly. Yeah. But you can also, I think there are just some issues that do stand out as being kind of problems in and of their own right. So the one that I was just thinking of listening to Richard was further education. You asked me earlier about what I'm angry about, and actually, and this is not a party political point, obviously, but we have an education system that, to my mind, looks like it was designed by people who went to university who thought their children were going to go to university. So we have a university system that has a very clear pathway from GCSEs to A-levels into degree into the workplace. But for the half of children, on average, and it varies across the country, but for the half of children who don't go through that route, the further education system is not this nice laid out clear pathway. It's not the same quality. It changes quite a lot, so neither young people or their parents or employers really know how to navigate the system. And that's one where that obviously it interrelates with the regional issues that we're talking about, but it's true in all parts of the country. So I think there are some of these policy issues, but where even before you think about the interrelated nature and the complexity, actually, I think there are some policy areas where we're not doing well enough.
We need to get onto policy, I think, and what to do about it, because you have this intriguing policy toolkit. You're saying, okay, policymakers of whatever party, it's not worked. And here's some principles with which to hold in mind when you're designing policy. Do you want to develop that, Richard?
The first thing is really understand what is driving the inequality of concern. And that's a key one. So
you're an official and a minister, and so your starting off point is which inequality is actually creating this conversation, this news in newspapers, this issue we must address.
Yeah. So, for example, we have very low success in education in certain areas. And we know that's a serious problem because it's not then encouraging firms into the area. It's creating an idea that there's no point in doing training, and those who go into higher education often leave the area. So focus on Helen's point there. We're very, very poor at upskilling those who don't take the university route. We're much worse at doing this than many other European countries.
We've been saying this, though, since 1945.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
not exactly...
And so the reason we've rethinking that, I just give you this example, is that think about what you need to do. It's not a matter of training alone. It's a matter of where you train, what you train, and how you coordinate once people are trained, where they're going to be productive. What this means, it's straightforward, I agree, Will, but it isn't part of typical policy. And that is to locate the training of this group and with the local successes in local technologies, local kind of successful business. You don't want to just train them in any old local business. It's about ones that can give opportunity, career opportunities, those kind of things. That seems interesting, but it's quite a complicated thing to think through. And it's certainly not just about thinking about training on its own. It's about both. That's what we've said. The other thing there is that when we do these training programs, there are many of them. They're very confused. They're difficult for employers to understand. If we just look at other countries and being successful, national accreditation is an obvious key policy here. We do this quite well with universities, actually. We do it very, very poorly with the non-university group. Something that all employers can understand, that the trainees themselves can take to a firm and say, this is my qualification, and you can hype it around and get the best job match. These are simple things, but they come from figuring out what the key inequality is, what's driving it, and then what set of interactions are causing it not to have already been fixed. Why isn't it already fixed? So I think that's the way we think of it. That's our first thing. Figure out what's going on underneath, what's driving the inequality. The next one is figure out if it's something gone wrong with the markets. Is the market economy just not working in fixing this?
That's the thing she cited, wasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. You can think of why it is that many of the most productive types of businesses have all developed in southeast of England. What is it? Why didn't they go to areas that are much low cost? And then you say, well, what is it that's stopping the market working? Surely the market will say, you go to where it's the lowest cost, that's going to be the cheapest place to develop this. So what is it that's stopping that? And obviously it's the set of interactions you need to make that kind of productive business flourish.
No, I think another way to say that makes it clear in some sense why this is less asinine than it sounds in a sense, is that one thing that people look at is income inequality or wealth inequality, and they turn to let's just redistribute some income. Let's do tax and transfers of some sort. Let's just tax the rich more and give more to the poor, so more welfare benefits, for example. Or let's do minimum wages. Let's take, the problem is people have low wages. Let's give them higher minimum wages and that'll solve the problem. And we've done lots of that. They have an effect on the income distribution for sure. But another way of saying exactly the same thing that Richard's saying is get to the source of these problems. Rather than just take somebody who has a low income in the market and therefore give them something else, or try to increase their wage and maybe price them out of the market altogether in some cases, actually work out, why can't that person command a higher wage? Is it because employers have too much power in a local market and therefore they're not being paid the right wage, in which case a minimum wage might be a good tool to use? Is it that they haven't got the right kind of skills that allow them to be a more productive worker and to command a higher wage? When you look at really rich people, the other end of the spectrum, is the problem that actually you've got a big wealthy person that's captured some kind of market power, they're getting more than they really deserve? Or is it an entrepreneur who's creating lots of jobs? They're very different types of people. So working out really, what is it going on? Are we happy with that? Or do you want to change markets in a way that make that work better? Then you can really tackle the source of these problems, rather than just trying to use a sticking plaster to take money off some people and give it to other people after the fact.
Just to follow up on that, it almost was, again, why the review started, because we're aware that we spend a lot of time at IFS worrying about redistribution, what incomes different households get. And we realised that we could do that and make the place less unequal, but it wasn't solving many of the problems that were building up and driving many of the inequality concerns. And a good one is the growing in-work poverty. So you have families in work poverty, where families are in full-time, the adult might be in full-time work, but still well below the level of income that we think as a society is reasonable. So the upshot is that they earn their income, but then we top it up with quite a bit of universal credit or other transfers. Two things. One is people don't like that. They don't like getting long-term handouts. Of course, it's better than not getting any at all, but better if they can earn their way into what we used to call self-sufficiency. And we used to think that if you get someone a job, they'll earn their way out of the benefit universal credit system. That just hasn't worked. And so when we look at what's going on there, it's much more about the quality of work, but the quality, will it deliver the progression out of poverty for someone? If all you do is transfer to them or give them a minimum wage, neither of those two things are solving this underlying concern. And so in the review, we spend a lot of time worrying about how do you create the right circumstances for people to flourish in a way on their own.
Well, now what's the answer to that question?
The answer to that question is what we were saying before. Let's go for two things. One is it that they're just being paid too little because the local companies have got too much power? You can't find another job, so you tend to take a lower wage. That's a kind of what we call a competition. It's a market failure, local market failure.
Now, market failure.
Yes, market failure.
Some listeners will think, what the hell is a market failure? Because you both used it. We should
A market failure is when the market is not operating to produce the level of income, the level of growth that could be attained in the economy. And in many cases, the market fixes that. It sees an opportunity, goes for it, and then growth happens. But there are lots of cases where that may not happen. One of them is when you don't have enough economic dynamism. There's just not enough opportunities for people. The other thing, though, on the other side is they just may not have the right level of skills, and that comes back to where we were before, that to solve this is not going to be done through the tax and transfer and welfare system. It's going to be done by looking at the underlying productivity of workers.
This season of The We Society is brought to you in association with the Nuffield Foundation. For more than 80 years, the Nuffield Foundation has funded research and innovations that sit at the heart of some of society's biggest challenges. Evidence has the power to change lives, whether it's improving educational outcomes, reducing inequality, or understanding how society is changing. The Nuffield Foundation's work helps policymakers and practitioners tackle complex problems. To find out more about the Foundation and its research centres, visit nuffieldfoundation.org. When I was going to challenge you at the very beginning to see how we could kind of boil this down so it's been a manageable kind of conversation, you identified health, wealth, geography, and lack of growth. We've discussed wealth. Let's just dogleg into health. I think it's time for Helen to run with the ball a bit. Go on, Helen.
Well, I think health's an interesting one, isn't it? Because ultimately, what we all care about is having happy, healthy lives. And, if you aren't going to have a happy, healthy life, none of this matters at all. It's pretty shocking that there are big differences in terms of how, not just how long people live, although obviously how long you live matters, but also the quality of those years. How many people live with chronic disease? How many people live with obesity, with mental health issues? There are really stark differences within and across communities across the UK. It's kind of at the end point of a lot of these other inequalities. They come together. Inequalities in place and income and wealth often come together.
What's the word you use
in ways
then?
That produce like bad health outcomes.
But health is the canary in the coal mine.
Oh, there you go. That's it. That's what I was thinking of.
It's telling you something's going wrong when you see these health disparities.
I also think it's an interesting one because I think if you think about what we've seen in the last 20 years with this stagnant income growth, one of the reasons I think that's a problem is because people, I think completely reasonably, expect to be better off than their parents. And their parents want their children to be better off than they were. They want this sense of growth in the economy. And part of that is not just that you've got more income in your pocket and you can buy more stuff, but also that you can live a longer, healthier, happier life. So when people feel not only are they not able to get a house like their parents could, or they haven't got a good job, that actually they also have, they see young people with mental health problems. I think that health is a really big part of what worries people about the current situation. It's more than money.
This epidemic of people claiming they've got ADHD, depression of some sorts, concentration difficulties. It's incredible, actually.
The statistics for young people.
It's real. I don't think it's it's manufactured.
Yeah. Well, I think there's more work to be done, and we'll do more of this at IFS. Picking exactly in some of these systems what's going on and how much of it is genuine underlying need and what kind of need and how much of it is kind of the way the system works. But there does seem to be some amount of genuine increase in, fewer children are getting to school. They lack gross motor skills. They lack as much language skills in some cases. And once you have those problems, you're more likely to become a child that has some kind of disability support. Once you're one of those children, you're more likely to become an adult that has disability, and so on and so on. So you take these children with problems and they become adults with problems. And I think there are lots of intertwined issues that come together, and health is an outcome.
Let's talk about wealth.
Yeah, wealth is, if you think of the debate on inequality, wealth is a huge part of it. But if you look at the statistics, you might think we have high wealth inequality. It's higher than income inequality, and so it's high. But again, it's not something that's rocketed up over time. So what is going on here? Why is there such a concern? I think there are kind of two parts to this, and it's very related to low growth. You think about the difference in wealth between people, and you think about, well, how many years do I have to work to kind of make up that difference? How far am I away from someone further up the wealth distribution? It used to be said, in a nice growing economy, I can get myself up the wealth distribution just through my own work and human capital. Over time, because of low growth, incomes have not grown, wealth stays further and further apart in absolute terms. It's turned out that even over the last 15 years, from going from the median to the top, it used to take about 10 years of income. It now takes 16 to 20 years of income. So this difference is real, and it shows up across areas, and it shows up across generations. So the younger generation now see a much steeper climb in terms of how much income to get up the wealth distribution. And you can see this back to where we started in your ability to get on the housing ladder. If you have to, how much income do you need to own your house? So again, it's become much harder for younger generations to make this step up. If I was looking for something that created depression among young people, that would be one of them.
The most depressing thing for young adults is to be single and 35 and living with your parents. And the most depressing thing for the parents is to have your 35-year-old offspring.
And increasingly the case, especially for young men in the UK.
Everyone's depressed. So wealth, health, geography, got that covered. Growth. When I came to the launch of the review, I was struck actually how all the panelists, you're all saying growth's got to be the answer. But actually, how are we going to get growth then, folks? It's the kind of least convincing part of it all, really.
Yeah, it's the hardest. One way it ties together in an obvious way is almost where we started. If you've got 60% of the economy in a very low productivity state, i.e. no growth at all, doesn't seem to be adapting and taking up new technologies and bringing new skilled young people to work with those technologies. Outside London, if you've got a degree, you're much more likely to be working in a job that's not really using your skills. That's a gap that we could fill. And in a way, we can't expect to get growth without solving the regional imbalance. So I think these two things go together.
So I'd add to that too, that I've become, I'm about to say slightly grumpy, maybe slightly grumpy in general in life actually, but slightly grumpy about...
No, you're charming, not grumpy.
No, I'm optimistic, but grumpy about... genuinely part of the problem is that there's a subset of people who think there's an easy answer. That if you just tax wealth more and redistribute it, or if you just do X, Y, or Z, if you just devolve some more powers, that will be the solution. And I think the reality is actually you need to do the hard yards across lots of policy areas. So that's not just, we talked about training, but skills more broadly, across the tax system, because that misallocates lots of our resources, across competition policies and regulation, regional policy, industrial policy.
Finance.
So
I'd include the financial sector.
Absolutely, capital. So, but in all these areas, you need expert policy solutions, and you need to do them sometimes in a coordinated way, in the way that Rich was talking about, so that you get second cities. You're also really frankly going to need to make some political choices. I'll give you one clear example of that. The UK could have a second city or a third city. Does the central government want to pick that city? Is it going to just pick Manchester and make it run with it and pour money into Manchester and resources and coordinate policies around Manchester? Or do you want to devolve substantive powers and let regions compete and see which ones wins, or something else? But you have to make a decision about that. So there's hard yards across many areas. The other thing I'd add that I think we're lacking in the UK, and it's become more true, is stability of policy. There are so many policy. So I spent a long time, looking at the tax system, and that's a great example of where policy changes left, right, and centre. I really think you could pick any version of the corporation tax system from the last 20 years, make it stable at that level for 20 years, and it would be better than having a system that changes every Tuesday afternoon.
There's two stats which are in my mind. One was from the Levelling Up white paper in 2001. If you could just close the productivity gap by 2/3 between London and the rest of you would get up to £2 trillion of extra output by 2050. And then I have another number, which is I think you could build a £1 trillion tech economy by 2040. Well, both these things are in our hands and both things are feasible. A lot of this discussion would be less urgent if either of those two things, or both of them, could happen at the same time. They're probably interrelated, actually. You're both nodding. What are you thinking as I speak?
I mean, that's what we're driving at, Will, in the review. Why is it that tech has so developed so much in London? Why can't we get a big tech hub, say, in Manchester? We already know it's partly happening. So how do we get the coordination of policies to make that work? And all I would say is that, whenever we talk about this, someone will always have their magic solution. One close to your heart that we mentioned before is venture capital.
Yeah.
But venture capital on its own is just not going to do it. You've just got to get, as we've laid out, I think, this kind of whole collection of policies together to work. And I think once people have got that in their mind, you can lay out the steps towards your another tech hub in a much more coherent way. By the way, I'd kind of add to that, when we started this review, we also saw a lot of good trends, a lot of optimism things, and part of the thing that makes us so energized by this report and fixing this is we do a lot of good things. And I was thinking of higher education. We have a huge growth in higher education, and education for women is growing even faster than men. By the way, among our ethnic groups, most do extremely well in education. What we worry about here is that those good trends somehow have stalled, but they do put us in the potential position of doing exactly what you want if we can get this well laid out, coordinated set of policies to deliver just what you have suggested.
Now, we're reaching the end of this, and I'm going to give you both an opportunity just to say, a kind of resounding sign-off. If you listen to this, they'll be intrigued. What's your message to them?
Well, one is read the book that came out just recently that tries to bring it all together. That's one key thing.
And just to give the name check the book.
The book is called Challenging Economics.
Inequalities.
Challenging Economics, that's right. Challenging Inequalities, Why We Got Stuck and How to Get Out of It.
So read the book, okay. But
read the book.
What should draw them to read the book? What's the kind of persuade them, convince them, energize them?
The impetus is to try and figure out, when we see so many policies apparently going wrong, try and figure out why they might be going wrong. Are they addressing the kinds of inequalities of concern? And then how to make them work better. And I think that's what you find here. We show why a training policy or an innovation policy might not work in some places, working in others, and then how to fix it so it could work in some places.
That's pure gold, actually. And Helen?
I hope so.
So what I would say is that the UK has long-running problems that matter for all of us. Even if you're rich, maybe your kids won't be as rich, or maybe your kids will get dementia and you'll care about how they're treated or something. So all of us should care about the long-run funk that the UK is in. There are absolutely reasons to be optimistic. There are no shortage of good ideas here. There are lots of ways. We know how to fix the taxes. We know how to fix lots of policies. This is not a shortage of knowing what to do. We just need to find a set of institutions and political leaders that can follow through on this. And on that, I would say, be wary of anybody who offers or thinks they've got just an easy solution. Just do this and it'll fix that. It won't. I think we citizens, voters, need to get used to the idea that actually we're going to need a set of policies, a set of coordinated policies, a bit of long-termism, and that will pay dividends. So we've got a really big problem. We should absolutely be optimistic about the solutions, about the ability to have a richer country overall, and also one that doesn't have some of these horrible downsides in terms of some forms of inequality. But we need to get realistic about expecting our politicians to do some long-term policy making.
Well, thank you both very much. Talking to two doyens of social science has been very rewarding. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you so much for listening. The We Society is brought to you by the Academy of Social Sciences in association with the Lever Hume Trust and the Nuffield Foundation. I'm Will Hutton, the producer is Emily Finch, and it's a Whistledown production. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a comment, share with your colleagues and friends. And thank you so much for listening.